So there's a certain phrase that Neville said that has stuck with me ever since I read it, which was a few years ago. And he said that he never barred himself. And I spoke about how he said he never had any background and he had no financial status, no academic status, no financial status. He wasn't famous. He didn't have anything. He wasn't known. But he was a man who dreamed. And when he said that he never barred himself, even though he didn't have these qualifications in what he would call the world of Caesar, what he meant was that he never barred the inner man. There was a time that in my own inner world, inside myself, there were certain places that felt restricted from me. Sort of like when I was a child and someone told me that I wasn't allowed to enter a certain space or room. I applied that same rule within me, and there were certain spots and places that felt off limits to me. And I would bar myself from actually occupying or entering those rooms. I would feel that there were closed doors and I wasn't allowed in. I felt like there were certain things I wanted, like love and forgiveness, and I wanted to move on and I wanted to change. But these lands felt foreign to me. They felt like they were a myth, and they didn't feel real to me. And it felt like they had a gate surrounding them, and I was trying to enter this land of forgiveness, and I would bang on its doors to let me in. And I felt the doors were always closed on me. But I didn't see that it was simply self-giving and self-denial. And I was barring myself. And I didn't know that myself was the inner man. I've been trying so hard to find freedom in the external that I forgot about my internal freedom. And I saw that that's actually what I've been seeking this whole time. And when I read that he never barred himself, I started to apply that more into my life. I started to see that these places and these things that I once thought were myth, like love within me or freedom within me, they weren't myths at all. And they weren't fantasies. They were actual realities. And all I had to do was turn my attention that way. I had to start imagining those things. And I would restrict myself because I came up with reasons as to why those places were off limits to me. Whether it's my endless debate, whether I'm worthy or deserving or not, which I could never figure out. I could never figure out if I was worthy enough to have something. And so I gave up on it. I said, who do I ask? If I ask somebody and they passed away tomorrow, I'd have to move on and ask somebody else. And I have to eventually ask myself if I'm worthy of the thing that I want. And the answer is always yes. With me, if I want to be nice to myself, at least, it should always be yes. And that's what, if I had to say, take something that I've said and apply it, it would be this: never bar yourself. And I really do plead with you. And I mean you, the inner you. Don't bar yourself in your imagination. Don't restrict yourself. Don't keep placing limits upon yourself and conditions that first must be met. Do not place the condition of the outer things must be organized and rearranged a certain way before I can imagine. This is something I made a mistake on, was that I would wait for things to change before I changed. And regardless of what happens here, the goal is to try to change as quickly. If you can catch it quickly, it's better than to wait for things to become hectic in your world for you to change something. Do it now. And that's something I've always learned, was that you can learn to stop barring yourself if you do everything that you need now. And you don't wait till tomorrow to imagine something. You imagine it right now. And as I've spoken about how you imagine being it. That's what you persist in. And so when you bar yourself, it means that you're not occupying the states you want to have. You're trying to imagine to keep trying to become it. You keep trying instead of persisting in being it. And that makes the difference. That's thinking from it and thinking about it. That's the difference. And this is something that you can apply every single day. Learn to never bar yourself. You're going to come into a certain spot within you that you're going to find yourself feeling stuck and restricted in. Apply that. Just tell yourself, never bar yourself. What is it that you're wanting inside? Free yourself from the inside out. Trust that plan. And trust that it will unfold. And when you start to move with your own faith, which is your own trust, really those are your feet within, is your own trust. When you start to occupy new places, you'll see that there is nothing that's off limits to you. There's nothing off limits to the inner man inside of the world of imagination. There's nothing off limits. Essentially, there is no no unless you create the no. And that is something hard to wrap one's head around, because we might be in an addiction of saying no to oneself, might be an addiction of self-denial. But I ask you to try to live in self-fulfillment. Try to change, and you have this power. The inner man has the power to change what is in imagination. You have this power. You have the power to settle in and to accept a new state. You don't have to keep visiting things. You can actually occupy them and take them. This is the word that Neville always used. He used appropriation, which is a very strong word. Appropriation means to take it without permission. And when you start to live this way inside yourself, you will see how much you've barred yourself, as I did. I saw how much I didn't imagine. I would wait, or I would feel that I wasn't quite morally good yet, or I would feel that I haven't quite achieved something externally before I imagined it, which was, it goes against the whole point, right? And so learn from my mistake on that. And I am just a person, but I've learned a lot of things through these teachings, and what I've learned was to never bar yourself. It's the one thing that I'd have to teach. It's something that I've done. It's something that hit me so close to home, which was restrictions. All I knew was to be stuck inside. I was really in cycles, and I saw that I was the one who was creating the cycle, and it all started with me. But I didn't think me as this external person, but me, the internal man. That is who started this all. And so I went back. I went to see the scene, I went to the thought, I went to the feeling, and I saw who is the one observing these things, who is aware of having these experiences. And I saw that that's me. And I've had a dream where I saw that I was the light. And that's you as well, because me and you are the I of man together. So we individualize, but we are actually expanding. The I expands. It's the self inside. And that is who we're barring, which is us. So it really is all self-denial. That's something I learned from one of Neville's students, Linda. Maybe I'll link it in the description. It's a video where he says all denial is self-denial. And that was another thing that stuck with me. The idea of denying oneself was something very, because I know Neville once said that he thinks that revision was what listen to this. If you're going to listen to anything he says, which is learn to do revision. Which is don't end the day with the habitual imagining. Change it. Don't end the day thinking that you can't change what you're thinking, if you will. Fall asleep in a different state, or fall asleep reimagining the day. And I find that quite powerful, but I found to never bar oneself even more powerful for me and my journey. Because the amount of freedom that you get from not barring oneself, it really does produce a peace within you. And when you see that it's a peace that was created without any outside thing, and it was created by yourself, for yourself, you'll see how much of a loving act it is. And you'll see that it's something that you can continue all the time. And this isn't really about trying to manifest anything. This is about learning how to be things inside. This is learning about fulfillment inside. This is learning about changing things inside. That's why one of the first things it tells you to do in the scriptures in the gospel is to repent, which is to radically change one's mind. It uses the word radical. So you learn to be, so the radical really is from within. If I want to be radical, it comes from within. Everything comes from within. So if I want to change something, I must know that change is within me. If I want to free myself from something, I must know that the freedom is within me. And the imprisonment is also within me. All things are within me. And I start there. And when you start there, you'll see that the self that Neville's talking about, that he never barred, was his own imagination. Because he says man is all imagination. And since man is all imagination, when you go to imagine a version of yourself that you want to be, you must see that that version is entirely made up of imagination. So if you become it and embody it, you must be it. And if you must be it and it starts to express itself through you, then a version of you that was all imagination is now expressing. And so man truly is all imagination. And it's very freeing to accept this. And I don't question it like I used to anymore. Learning to not bar oneself has been one of the most, it's brought so much clarity to my inner world, was that no matter what it is, I don't say no to myself, no matter what. I might question whether or not I want it. I might question my desire of it. I might question if it's something I want for me. But whatever it is, whatever I conclude on, I'm not going to say no to myself. It might take me a second to think about what it is I want, but I always know that it's never going to be ended on no. And I trust the yes that I give myself entirely. And then I start to feel more one with my inner self instead of feeling so connected to this outer self. There really isn't an outer self. This is truly a shadow. It's just hard to imagine that this could be a shadow because we see shadow comes from light. And it's very hard for us to imagine that this fleshly world is a shadow. But it is. It's truly an effect. And you can test that if you know how to change, if you know how to move inside. And if you know how to move and you know how to sustain the move, you should see a change in your world because you're changing the only thing that is your world, which is yourself. And you always start with self. And so I plead with you to not bar yourself. Really learn how to give yourself the freedom you want. And the freedom you're seeking, no matter how free it is, no matter how much it is, you don't feel ashamed about it. You grant it. And then you will realize that the Savior you're seeking has always been within you. And I don't care what it is. It says, whatsoever you desire, believe you have it and you will. So I'm not called to figure out when. I'm not called to figure out how it's going to happen. I'm called to believe I have it. Or at least I'm told to believe I have it. And so I follow that teaching. I don't try to figure out if I'm worthy of it. I don't try to figure out if something bad's going to first happen for it to come into being. I don't question that. I believe I have it. And that is learning to not bar yourself. Is you practice that every single day. And you will find restrictions. You will find rooms that you will feel that are off limits to you. You might even be scared to actually occupy them. You might even realize that you have been living in a certain space within you that you've never wanted. And so you have these mental spaces within you that it must be pounded into the mind that there is no mental space that is off limits to you. If you can just accept that and don't become so skeptical and question it so much, you will see that all has already been said yes to within. If it's been conceived in the mind, it's already been said yes to. But it's us that we don't necessarily accept it. And this is why Neville says he's not talking about emotion, but about acceptance. It's the acceptance that the wish has been granted, or the belief that I have it. It's the same thing that's being said, and it will forever be the same thing that's going to be said. I give my take on it, but it's the same thing. Neville said, never bar yourself. It says to believe you have it. And I'm saying you have all the mental spaces within you that you can occupy. It's the same exact thing. Basically, I want to give you, the inner man, the freedom that you've been wanting. You might need some permission on the outside first, but you'll realize you never needed it. And so all of these videos are addressed to you, the inner man, the one who can change, the one who can, as I once said, the inner man can create a king in a basement. It doesn't need anything on the outside for it to assume a position. And that's the power. If you can see that it's an actual power that you have, which is to be able to deny one's senses and assume something new in its place within you, and that change within you, if you sustain it, it comes into being. If you can see that, well, then you'll see it's a power. And you may have misused this power for a very long time, which is what was in my case. And when you realize that you've misused it and you start to not bar yourself, you start to free yourself, you will be given, as Neville said, the energy back that you thought you lost. I mean, there's been so many times where I felt so down, and I looked at my imagining and I saw that those were things that I've been imagining for decades. If I was honest with myself, I saw that I held on to these certain thoughts that brought me down for a very long time, and they brought me down. And the moment I broke it, the moment I saw that it was me who was given it the power, that I was given the power to thought and not back to myself, that I wrongfully gave it to that, I let it control me in a way. I saw that there was no thought that was greater than me. There was no feeling greater than me. And when I saw that, it felt like all of this energy returned to me. Like I was so thirsty and I finally found the water I was seeking. But it was not a water outside of me. It was a water truly within me. And so you practice not barring yourself through belief, believing in oneself. And you persist in being things, no longer trying to become them. Although essentially you are becoming the new state, but you are imagining already being the new state. And you try that every night. You don't bar yourself. No matter what it is, no matter if it sounds silly to you, I don't question if it's possible. I'm called to believe I have it. And the freedom in that, it puts a smile on my face because it's so... I've never had this happen to me where I studied Neville and then I started to see him in my dreams. I never had it where I started to have all these visions from learning from someone. And I'm telling you from my own study on this that this is a gospel. This is a good news. It's all good news. And so you test the good news. Test that, believe you have it. It's really good news. Don't question, but believe you have it. Do that first before you try to figure out the questions. Try to prove it to yourself before you come up with all of the theories and questions. This is very common, which is, well, what if this person imagines that? And what if that person's... Don't worry about that. Or what about everyone you pushed out? Try to prove it instead of trying to figure it out. Try to prove it to oneself. Change yourself, meaning change you, the inner man. Occupy something new within you. That's what I mean by change oneself. I don't mean you now... pick up jogging. I'm not talking about anything external to you. I'm saying occupy something new within you, sustain that newness, sustain it, whatever it is. And if your world starts to reflect that, well, then you found a key. And what you'll find is that the key you've been seeking all along, that master key that you've been wanting, is self. And so self is the key to all the doors and all the mental spaces that you want to be opened. A full acceptance that you have it. A full acceptance that you occupy it. A full acceptance that it is already so because it is to you the inner man. And so you identify and associate yourself with that being. The inner being. You just identify with it. Don't ask so many questions. Try to prove it to yourself instead of trying to figure out the answers to those questions. They'll come, but first try to prove it. I've noticed the more you prove this, the less questions you actually have. You will see how true these teachings truly are and how freeing they really are. And then you'll go on the true voyage of life. Everyone, you've seen people sail across the world on a voyage, but the true voyage of life, the true victory, the true voyage is self-discovery. Is when you discover the land within you, which is just yourself. And so that is the true voyage of life. And you don't need to do anything outside of yourself. So you get to let go of this external world. Meaning you get to see its effect and no longer feel like a victim to it. And I'm not claiming this is the easiest thing, but I am claiming that it's possible. And so I want to just end this on another plea. Do not bar yourself. If you're close to doing it, just say those words to yourself. Never bar self.